"You're going to rot here. The only way you're leaving is in a coffin." My own son's words echoed in my ears like daggers as he shoved me violently into the small, rustic cabin. The sound of my phone smashing against the wooden floor was the last thing I heard before the lock clicked from the outside. He had destroyed my only connection to the outside world, and now I was completely alone, without food, without water, abandoned like an animal in a cage. My heart hammered so hard against my ribs I thought it would break free. At 66, after giving my entire life to this ungrateful son, I found myself imprisoned by his own hands, condemned to die of thirst and starvation, while he was off on a luxury cruise with Marlene, his wife, and that terrible mother-in-law who manipulated him so much. But let me tell you how I got here, how the woman who was once the center of a happy family ended up a prisoner of her own blood. My name is Ella. For 40 years, I believed I had built a strong family, one filled with love and sacrifice. I had worked since I was 18, a seamstress in a small textile factory downtown. My hands, rough from so much sewing and embroidery, held our family together after my husband left us, when our son, Henry, was only 8 years old. From that moment on, Henry became my reason for living, the engine that pushed me out of bed before sunrise every morning so I could get to work on time. I remember the day I decided I would do anything to give my son the life he deserved. It was a rainy Tuesday in October, and Henry came home crying because the other kids were making fun of his worn-out sneakers. That night, while he slept, I counted every dollar I had saved for months to buy myself a new dress, money I immediately used to buy him the best sneakers in the store. Seeing his smile the next day was worth more than any outfit I could have bought for myself. That's how the years passed. Every extra dollar, every hour of overtime, every moment of rest I sacrificed, it was all for him. When he turned 16, I worked double shifts to buy him the motorcycle he wanted so badly. At 21, I mortgaged my small house to pay for his college education in engineering. I never complained. I never asked for anything in return. I truly believed a mother should give everything for her children without expecting anything back but their love and respect. Henry graduated with honors and got an excellent job at a construction company. I felt like the proudest woman in the world when I saw him leave every morning in his sharp suit, carrying his leather briefcase. "My son is a successful professional," I'd tell my neighbors with a smile that came from my soul. For the first few years after he graduated, our relationship seemed perfect. He visited regularly, took me out to elegant dinners, and always told me how grateful he was for all my sacrifices. Everything changed when he met Marlene. The first time he introduced her to me, something inside me cringed. It wasn't just her cold, calculating demeanor, but the way she looked at my son, as if he were an investment that needed to be protected from outside influences. Marlene was a 32-year-old woman, tall, with perfectly styled brunette hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. She worked as an administrator at a private clinic, and from the very start, she made it clear that she considered Henry's family, specifically me, to be beneath her social standards. During the first few months they were dating, I tried to get closer to her. I cooked her favorite dishes when they came to visit. I bought her small gifts with my few savings. I even learned to cook sophisticated meals that I knew she liked. But every gesture of love from me was met with a fake smile and sarcastic comments that my son either didn't notice or, worse, chose to ignore. "Ella, don't go to so much trouble," Marlene would say with that sugary voice that got on my nerves. "We don't need you to do all this. We're not kids anymore." But I could see the disdain in her eyes, the contempt for the older woman who had raised the man she now considered her property. The wedding took place 2 years later at a fancy hall that cost more than $20,000. I, who had dreamed for years about the day my son would get married, felt like a stranger in my own family. Marlene had organized everything without consulting me, from the guest list to the color of the flowers. When I tried to suggest that maybe we could include some family traditions that had been important to us, she looked at me as if I had said something completely ridiculous. "Ella, dear," she said with that condescending tone I had already started to recognize, "this is a modern celebration. I don't think our guests would appreciate those old-fashioned customs." Henry, who used to defend me against any derogatory comment, simply nodded and changed the subject. On the wedding day, I sat in the front row, wearing a green dress I had bought at a discount store, feeling small and invisible as I watched my son promise forever to a woman who had already started to pull him away from me. During the ceremony, when the officiant spoke about the importance of family and respect for parents, I saw Marlene squeeze Henry's hand with a smile that chilled me to the bone. That night, as I was clearing the dishes from the small dinner I had hosted at my house for our closest relatives, I happened to overhear a conversation between Marlene and her mother in the backyard. "Now that we're married, we need to set clear boundaries," Marlene was saying in a voice she had never used in front of me. "Henry is too soft with his mother. She thinks she can still control his life, but those days are over." "You're right, honey," her mother replied with a cruel laugh. "Men need their wives to open their eyes to these things. A meddling mother-in-law can ruin a marriage before it even starts." I froze behind the window, feeling every word like a slap in the face. The woman I had made so many efforts for, whom I had tried to love like a daughter, was already planning my exclusion from my own son's life. I finished cleaning the kitchen in silence, tears streaming down my cheeks, wondering if Henry knew what his new wife really thought of me, or if he had simply chosen to ignore it to keep the peace in his marriage. That night, for the first time in years, I went to sleep with an emptiness in my chest that I didn't know how to fill. The following months confirmed my worst fears. Henry's visits became more and more sporadic, and when he came, he was always with Marlene, and for shorter and shorter periods. The conversations that used to flow naturally between us became tense and superficial, constantly interrupted by subtle but hurtful comments from his wife. "Henry, don't forget we have that dinner with my parents," Marlene would say every time my son seemed to be enjoying our conversation. Or, even worse, "Honey, your mother looks tired. Maybe we should go so she can rest," as if I were a decrepit old woman who needed to be cared for, instead of a vibrant woman who simply wanted to spend time with her son. But what hurt me the most was seeing how Henry had begun to change. The loving and considerate son I had raised was transforming into a distant stranger, someone who seemed to be ashamed of his humble beginnings and of the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. The first time Henry spoke to me with contempt was on a Sunday afternoon, 3 months after his wedding. I had prepared his favorite lunch, the same chicken stew he had loved since he was a boy, and was anxiously awaiting his weekly visit. When he arrived, he was alone, which filled me with hope, thinking we would finally have some quality time as mother and son. But something in his eyes had changed. He was no longer the affectionate young man who hugged me when he arrived, but a stranger who greeted me with a cold kiss on the cheek and sat at the table as if he were fulfilling an annoying obligation. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, as I served the steaming stew onto his favorite plate, the same ceramic dish decorated with red flowers that I had bought to celebrate his 16th birthday. "Marlene and I have been talking, and we think it would be better if we started to have more space." His words hit me like a bucket of ice water. "Space? What does that mean, my son?" I asked, feeling my voice tremble despite my efforts to keep it steady. "It means that constant visits are affecting our marriage," he replied without even looking me in the eye, focused on stirring the stew as if it were the most important task in the world. "Marlene feels we don't have enough intimacy as a couple because I'm always coming over here." I sat across from him, feeling my legs shake. "Henry, you only come once a week. How can that affect your marriage? I just want to see you and spend time with you. You're the only thing I have." "Exactly! That's the problem!" he exploded, setting his spoon down on the table with a loud clatter that made the salt shaker jump. "I'm the only thing you have. Don't you realize how suffocating that is? I'm 30 years old, Mom. I can't keep being responsible for your happiness." His words were like daggers piercing my heart. The son I had worked for day and night, the one I had given up any chance of rebuilding my life for after his father abandoned us, was now telling me I was a burden on his existence. "I never asked you to be responsible for my happiness," I replied, my voice breaking. "I just asked you to love me as I have loved you. Is that too much to ask? Love shouldn't be a prison, he countered, repeating words that clearly weren't his own, but Marlene's. You need to understand that I now have a new family, new priorities. I can't keep living to please you. That afternoon, Henry left without finishing the lunch I had prepared with so much love. I stayed alone in my small kitchen, watching the full plate of food grow cold, feeling as if something inside me had broken forever. For the first time in my life, I wondered if it had been worth sacrificing so much for someone who now saw me as a nuisance. The following weeks were a silent ordeal. Henry followed through on his threat to space out his visits. What had once been a sacred appointment every Sunday became sporadic appearances every 2 or 3 weeks, always accompanied by Marlene and always in a hurry to leave. During those visits, she took charge of every conversation, interrupting any moment of intimacy between my son and me with comments about their plans, their trips, and their new high-class friends. Henry and I are thinking of buying a bigger house, Marlene announced during one of those visits while drinking the coffee I had specially brewed with imported beans that had cost me $30. Something out of town, in one of those gated communities where there's more security and a better class of people. The way she said, better class of people, while looking directly at me, made it clear that I didn't fit into that category. Henry, who would have once defended his mother from any implicit insult, simply nodded and continued eating the chocolate cake I had baked with him in mind. What about this house, then? I asked, referring to my home, the place where I had raised my son, where all our memories together were. Well, it's yours, Mom, Henry replied with indifference. You can do whatever you want with it. We won't be needing it anymore. Those words were a slap in the face. The house he had considered his home for 30 years was now just a place he wanted to get rid of, an uncomfortable reminder of his humble past that didn't fit with his new upper-middle-class life. But the worst was yet to come, right when I thought my relationship with my son had hit rock bottom. Marlene got a promotion at the clinic, and to celebrate, they organized a dinner at their new house, that modern mansion in the exclusive gated community they bragged about so much. I was not invited. I found out by chance when I called Henry to ask if he could come with me to the doctor. I had a test result come back with an irregularity, and I was scared. I can't, Mom, he said in a cold voice I didn't recognize. Marlene is having an important dinner with people from her work. It's very important for her career. But you can't come with me before the dinner? I insisted, feeling desperation take over. It would only be an hour at the office. I'm afraid to go alone. Mom, I need to help Marlene get everything ready. Can't you ask one of your friends to go with you? What friends? For so many years, I had been so focused on him, on his education, on his well-being, that I had neglected my own social relationships. Most women my age were busy with their grandchildren, their husbands, with lives they had built in a more balanced way than I had. I hung up the phone and sat in my living room for hours, staring at the photos of Henry that covered the walls. There he was at 5 years old, in his first school uniform that I had so carefully washed and ironed every day. There he was at 12, proud with the medal he had won in the math competition, the same competition for which I had paid for extra tutoring by working weekends. There he was at 18, graduating from high school with honors, the day I thought all my sacrifices had been worth it. The next day, I went to the doctor alone. The results were benign, thank God, but the experience of sitting in that waiting room completely alone, surrounded by other women accompanied by their sons or husbands, made me feel the deepest loneliness of my life. When I called Henry to give him the good news, his response was a curt, "That's good, Mom," before he quickly changed the subject to tell me how successful Marlene's dinner had been and how they had impressed all the important guests. It was then that I began to understand that I had lost my son forever. He hadn't died, but the loving, grateful man I had raised no longer existed. In his place was an ambitious stranger who was ashamed of his roots and who had chosen a woman who systematically pushed him away from the mother who had given everything for him. The months passed, and the visits became even more infrequent. Henry only showed up when he needed something, for me to hold on to an important document for him, to prepare a specific dish to impress Marlene's bosses, or to borrow money for some unexpected expense that their new lifestyle demanded. "Mom, could you lend me $5,000? He asked me during one of his rare visits. "It's for the down payment on a new car. Marlene's broke down, and she needs something a bit more elegant for her job." $5,000 represented almost all of my savings, the money I had saved dollar by dollar for years in case I ever needed a medical emergency or a major house repair. But as always, I couldn't deny my son anything. "Of course, my son," I replied, feeling my heart shrink. "When do you need it?" "Tomorrow would be perfect," he said with a smile that for a moment reminded me of the sweet boy he used to be. "I promise I'll pay you back in 3 months." That promise was never kept. Every time I mentioned the loan, Henry had a new excuse. Unexpected expenses from the new house, a work trip that Marlene needed to take, or car repairs that had ended up costing more than they expected. The day I hit rock bottom was on a gray Tuesday in November. Exactly 8 months after the loan, he never paid back. I had been fighting a terrible flu for a week, with a high fever and a cough that tore at my chest. My 66-year-old body no longer responded as it once did, and for the first time in decades, I felt truly vulnerable and scared. I called Henry, hoping he could either come with me to the doctor again, or at least spend some time with me to make sure I was okay. His answer chilled me to the bone. "I can't go, Mom. Marlene and I have a really important appointment with the architect to remodel the kitchen. It's taken us months to get an appointment with him. He's the most sought-after architect in the city." "Henry, please," I begged, my voice hoarse with fever. "I just need someone to be with me for a few hours. I feel so bad, and I'm afraid I'll pass out." "Can't you call a neighbor or something?" he replied with an irritation that cut through me like a dagger. Marlene says that independent adults need to know how to take care of themselves without constantly depending on others. Marlene says, those 2 words had become the most painful phrase in my vocabulary. Everything my son thought, decided, or felt now passed through the filter of that woman who had managed to turn my loving boy into a cruel stranger. "I'm your mother, Henry," I said, feeling the tears mix with the fever. "Since when am I an other to you?" "Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic. It's just the flu. Have some tea and rest. You'll feel better soon." He hung up without even saying goodbye. I was left holding the phone for several minutes, feeling something inside me die for good. The son for whom I had sacrificed my youth, my money, my dreams, my chances at love, had reduced me to an inconvenience that interfered with his important appointments. That night, as I lay in bed, trembling with fever and feeling more alone than ever, I made a decision that would change everything forever. I couldn't go on being the begging mother, the woman who pleaded for crumbs of attention and affection from a son who clearly despised me. I had to find a way to reclaim my dignity, even if it meant losing my relationship with Henry for good. My recovery from the flu took 2 full weeks. During that entire time, my phone remained silent. Henry never called once to ask how I was feeling, if I needed anything, or if I was even alive. It was my neighbor, Anne, a 70-year-old widow who lived in the house next door, who took care of me. She brought me medicine, prepared warm soups, and sat by my side during the most difficult nights. "Ella," Anne told me one afternoon while helping me change the sweaty sheets, "it's not normal for a son to abandon his sick mother like this. Something is very wrong here." She was right, but admitting it meant facing a truth I had been avoiding for months. My son had become a heartless person, and I had been an accomplice in that transformation by allowing him to treat me worse and worse without setting any boundaries. When I finally recovered, I decided it was time to act. If Henry wanted to treat me like a stranger, then so be it. I would no longer be the suffocating mother he described. I would no longer be available whenever he needed something. I would no longer be his personal ATM or his emergency cook. The first test came 2 weeks later when Henry called me as if nothing had happened. "Mom, could you make that lasagna Marlene loves so much? Her parents are coming for dinner, and she wants to impress them with some homemade food." For the first time in 30 years, I said no. "I'm sorry, Henry, but I can't. I have other plans." The silence on the other end of the line was so long, I thought the call had been disconnected. "Other plans?" he repeated in a tone of disbelief that would have been comical if it wasn't so pathetic. What kind of plans could you possibly have? My own, I replied, with a firmness that surprised even me. I'm no longer available whenever you need me, especially after you didn't care if I was dead or alive during my illness. What are you talking about? It was just the flu. A flu that could have killed me, and you didn't even call to see how I was, I countered. Marlene said it was better to give you space so you could recover and not feel pressured. He lied shamelessly. Marlene believes. I finally exploded. When are you going to start thinking for yourself, Henry? When are you going to remember that you have a mother who loves you? Don't start with your drama, he yelled back. If you don't want to help me with a simple meal, fine, but don't try to emotionally blackmail me. He hung up violently, leaving me trembling. But for the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. The following days were strange. On one hand, I felt guilty for having denied my son something, but on the other, I was experiencing a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I didn't have to wait by the phone for his sporadic calls. I didn't have to emotionally prepare for his cold and calculating visits. For the first time in a long time, my house was truly my own. I took advantage of this freedom to reconnect with Anne and some other neighbors I had neglected during the years of obsessing over Henry. I started going for walks in the afternoons, tending to my small garden, and reading the books I had accumulated but never had time to enjoy. Slowly, very slowly, I began to remember who I was before I became solely Henry's mother. But my son was not ready to accept this new version of me. 3 weeks after our phone argument, he showed up at my door unannounced, accompanied by Marlene, and with a look of fury I hadn't seen since his adolescence. "We need to talk," he said as he walked into my living room without waiting for an invitation. Marlene followed, wearing a designer purple outfit that probably cost more than my monthly salary from the factory. "Of course, make yourselves comfortable," I said sarcastically, but I decided to remain calm. "How can I help you?" "You can start by explaining what's been going on with you lately," Henry said, sitting on the armchair where he used to curl up as a child so I could read him bedtime stories. "First you hang up on me, then you refuse to help with a simple meal, and now the neighbors are saying you're talking trash about us." "Talking trash about you?" I asked, genuinely confused. What did I supposedly say? Anne told her sister, and her sister told the woman at the grocery store that you said I was an ungrateful son who abandoned his sick mother. Marlene chimed in with that voice that feigned concern but dripped with venom. "Do you realize the damage that can do to Henry's reputation at work?" My mouth fell open. It was true that I had talked to Anne about my disappointment with Henry, but I never thought my words would travel so far, or that my son would be more worried about his reputation than about understanding my feelings. "Your reputation?" I asked Henry directly, completely ignoring Marlene. "That's your biggest concern, isn't it? Not the fact that your mother felt abandoned when she needed you most." "Oh, please!" Marlene burst out before Henry could respond. "Ella, you're 66 years old. It's time you grew up and stopped acting like a spoiled teenager looking for attention." The silence that followed those words was deafening. I looked at my son, expecting that he would finally stand up and defend the woman who had raised him. I expected him to tell his wife that she had no right to disrespect me in my own home, that he would remember everything I had sacrificed for him. But Henry just stayed quiet, staring at his shoes like a scolded child. Henry's silence was more painful than any insult Marlene could have thrown at me. In that moment, seeing my 30-year-old son sitting there like a coward while his wife attacked me in my own home, I understood that I had definitely lost the boy I had raised with so much love. "I see you have nothing to say," I said directly to Henry, feeling a rage begin to replace the sadness I had carried for months. "I see you're going to let me be disrespected in my own house without lifting a finger to defend me." He finally looked up, but in his eyes there was no guilt or remorse, only annoyance. "Mom, Marlene isn't disrespecting you. She's just telling you the truth you need to hear. You can't keep living as if you're the victim of everything." "The victim?" I stood up, feeling all the frustration accumulated over the years begin to boil in my veins. I'm the victim for expecting a minimum of respect from my own son, for wanting you to care if I was dead or alive when I had 104-degree fever. It was just the flu, he also yelled, standing up. You couldn't expect me to cancel my whole life for a simple flu. It wasn't a simple flu. It was your sick and scared mother asking her only son to go with her to the doctor, I yelled back, feeling tears of rage begin to roll down my cheeks. It was the woman who worked double shifts to pay for your college, who mortgaged her house to give you a career, who gave up every chance to be happy so that you could have everything you wanted. No one asked you to do that. His response hit me like a punch to the stomach. No one asked you to sacrifice your life for me. Those were your decisions. For a moment, the world stopped around me. My own son, the man I had given everything for, was telling me that my sacrifices had not only been unnecessary, but unwanted, that everything I had done out of love had been a gigantic mistake that he now resented. You're right, I said with a voice I didn't recognize as my own, cold and calm despite the storm raging inside me. No one asked me to sacrifice my life for you. They were my decisions, stupid decisions, by a woman who believed that a mother's love meant giving everything without expecting anything in return. Marlene smiled with satisfaction, clearly enjoying the spectacle of seeing me destroyed by my own son's words. I'm glad you finally get it, Henry continued, cruelly encouraged by what he interpreted as my surrender. Now maybe you can start living your own life instead of trying to control mine. Oh, I'm going to live my own life, I assured him, feeling a strange calm come over me. In fact, I'm going to start right now. I walked over to the small table where I kept my important documents and pulled out the paper I had been avoiding looking at for months. The will I had written years ago, in which Henry was the sole beneficiary of everything I owned. You know what, son? I said, holding the document in front of him. You're right. My sacrifices were my decisions, decisions I now deeply regret making. But this house, these savings, this inheritance you were going to receive, these are also my decisions. Henry's eyes fixed on the paper with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. What are you doing? I'm making a new decision, I replied, walking toward the paper shredder I had recently bought to get rid of old documents. I'm deciding that I no longer want a son who despises me to inherit anything from the stupid woman who sacrificed everything for him. Mom, wait! He yelled, lunging toward me as I slowly fed the will into the machine. But it was too late. The document disintegrated into thin strips that fell into the bin like confetti of my liberation. What did you just do? Marlene asked me, her voice suddenly high-pitched with her true concern. Until that moment, she had just been the cruel wife enjoying the family drama, but now she realized she had just lost a considerable inheritance. I just did what my son asked, I replied with a smile that came from my soul. I just stopped making decisions based on a love that is clearly unrequited. Henry was pale, staring at the remnants of the will as if he couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. Mom, you can't do that. This house, your savings, I'm your only son. Exactly, I said, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. You're my only son, and you just told me that all my sacrifices for you were mistakes that no one asked for. So now I'm going to correct those mistakes. Are you insane? Marlene shrieked, completely losing her composure. You can't disinherit your own son just because you had an argument. An argument? I looked at her with a calm that surprised me. Marlene, dear, this isn't an argument. This is the result of months of humiliation, contempt, and abandonment. And this is what happens when you treat someone like trash for so long that they finally decide they deserve something better. Mom, please, Henry pleaded, reaching for me with his hands outstretched, as if I were a wild animal that needed to be calmed. You're acting impulsively. You're angry and not thinking clearly. On the contrary, I replied, stepping away from him. For the first time in years, I'm thinking with perfect clarity. I'm realizing that raising an ungrateful son was my biggest mistake, but it doesn't have to be my permanent one. "You can't talk to your mother like that," Marlene yelled at Henry, but no longer from a place of moral superiority, but from the panic of seeing a fortune disappear before her eyes. "Tell her something. Fix this." The irony was delicious. The same woman who had spent years poisoning my son against me, who had encouraged his every cruelty, was now demanding that he treat me well because her financial future was at stake. "Look how interesting," I said, observing the growing desperation on both their faces. "For months, Marlene, you've been telling my son that I was a toxic, controlling mother who needed to learn to be alone. And now that I'm finally following your advice, you realize that maybe it wasn't such a good idea after all." "Ella, I never said those things," she lied shamelessly, but her trembling voice betrayed her. "Of course you did. And my son, instead of defending himself or his mother, chose to believe every one of your poisonous words. He chose to treat me like a nuisance, instead of the woman who gave him life and paid for the education he now uses to earn the money you both love to spend." Henry sank back onto the armchair with his head in his hands. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of the vulnerable boy he used to be, and my heart almost broke. "Almost, Mom," he said in a small voice. "I know I've been difficult lately. I know I might not have been the son you expected, but you can't punish me like this. We're family." "Family?" I repeated the word as if it were the first time I had ever heard it. "Do you know what that word means, Henry? It means being there when the other person needs you. It means mutual respect. It means not allowing anyone, not even your wife, to humiliate the person who gave you life." I can change," he mumbled, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. "No," I responded with a firmness that surprised him. "I'm no longer interested in whether you can change. I'm no longer interested in being the mother who begs for scraps of affection from a son who clearly despises me. I've decided I deserve better than that." "But we're your only family," Marlene shrieked, now playing the emotional blackmail card she had so often criticized me for using. I smiled at her with a sweetness that contrasted brutally with my words. "You were my family. Now you are two strangers who came to my house to disrespect me and demand an inheritance you're no longer going to receive." "You can't do this," Marlene screamed, completely losing the mask of sophistication she had always worn with me. "That house is worth more than $150,000. Your savings are our future." I heard her speak of our future, as if my money, the money I had earned sewing for 40 years, was something that belonged to them by divine right. The woman who had treated me like an ignorant peasant for years was now claiming my inheritance with the desperation of someone who had just seen their life plan vanish. "Interesting," I said, crossing my arms. "So now my savings are your future. The same woman who told me I was a dramatic old woman who needed to grow up is now here demanding that dramatic old woman's money." Henry stood up abruptly, with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was a mixture of panic, rage, and something that looked dangerously like a threat. "Mom, you're going to reverse this right now," he said in a low, controlled voice that reminded me of his father at his worst. "You're going to call your lawyer, and you're going to make a new will where I'm your only heir." "Or what?" I asked, feeling a strange calm in the face of his threatening attitude. "What are you going to do if I don't, Henry?" "Or you're going to find out what it really means to be alone," he replied, approaching me with slow, deliberate steps. "Do you think anyone is going to take care of you when you're a frail old woman? Do you think you'll be able to keep this house when you're 80 and can't even walk?" His words were like daggers, but they no longer hurt me as they once did. The woman who had endured months of humiliation had died in the last 20 minutes. In her place, someone stronger had been born, someone who finally understood her own worth. "I'd rather die alone in a nursing home than continue living as the emotional slave of a son who despises me," I responded with a serenity that baffled him. I'd rather strangers take my money than give it to someone who treats me like garbage." "You're insane!" Marlene screamed again. "Completely insane. Henry, do something. Your mother has lost her mind." "I haven't lost my mind," I replied, walking toward the front door. "I've found it, and now I'm kindly asking you to leave my house." "We're not leaving until you fix this insanity," Henry declared, planting himself in the middle of the living room as if he owned the place. "Then I'll have to call the police to explain the concept of trespassing," I replied, heading for the phone. "Don't you dare!" he yelled, snatching the receiver from my hand with a violence that scared me. For the first time in this confrontation, I felt a flicker of real fear. The man standing in front of me was no longer my son. He was a desperate stranger, capable of anything to protect what he considered his, and in that moment, I knew I was in real danger. "Give me back that phone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not until you come to your senses," he replied, holding the device out of my reach. "You're going to sit down, you're going to calm down, and we're going to talk about this like civilized adults." "Civilized adults?" I laughed, feeling a hysteria that bordered on madness. "You're going to teach me about being civilized? You, the man who just snatched the phone from his 66-year-old mother?" "It's for your own good," he yelled. And in that moment, I saw Marlene's influence on him completely. Those were words she had used with me many times, always justifying her cruelties as acts of tough love. "My own good," I repeated, feeling the last fiber of maternal love break for good in my chest. "For 30 years, everything you've done against me has been for my own good. Marrying a woman who hates me was for my own good. Abandoning me when I was sick was for my own good. Humiliating me in my own home is for my own good." Marlene approached us with that fake smile I knew so well. "Ella, dear, I know you're hurt, but you have to understand that Henry only wants what's best for you. We all want what's best for you. All of us." I looked at her with an incredulity that was almost comical. "You want what's best for me? You, the woman who spent 2 years poisoning my son against me? The woman who told me I was a dramatic old lady who needed to grow up?" That was just frustration in the moment," she lied pitifully. "You know we appreciate you very much." "You appreciate me?" I repeated her words as if they were a particularly funny joke. "You appreciate me so much that my son didn't speak to me for 2 weeks when I was sick? You appreciate me so much that you come to my house to demand I reverse a decision I made about my own money?" Henry moved closer, still holding the phone out of my reach. "Mom, listen to me. You are going to make a new will. You are going to leave me this house and your savings, and we are going to forget this ridiculous conversation." "Or what?" I asked again, but this time with a smile that visibly disturbed him. "Or you're going to find out what it means to be completely alone," he threatened. "Without a son, without money, without anyone who cares about you." "Henry," I said, moving toward him until our faces were just a few inches apart, "I'm already completely alone. I've already found out what it's like to have a son who doesn't care about me. The difference is that now I've finally decided to do something about it." Something in my tone must have alarmed him, because for the first time since this confrontation began, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean you two are going to leave my house right now and you are never coming back. I mean I'm going to change the locks tomorrow. I mean I'm going to make a new will where all my money goes to charities that help single mothers, so no other woman makes the mistake of sacrificing everything for an ungrateful son." "You can't do that!" they both yelled in unison, like a chorus of greed and desperation. "I can and I will," I assured them. "And if you ever bother me again, I'm going to call the police and I'm going to tell them exactly what kind of people you are. I'm going to tell them how you treated an old woman, how you threatened her in her own home, how you snatched her phone when she tried to call for help." Henry stared at me for a long moment, and for an instant, I thought that maybe he was finally going to react like the son I had raised. I thought he was going to give me back the phone, that he was going to apologize, that he was going to remember who I was to him. Instead, he threw the phone against the wall with such force that it shattered, filling my living room with broken plastic and crushed wires. "There's your phone," he said with a cruel smile that chilled my blood. "Let's see how you call the police now." The silence that followed was absolute. The three of us stood staring at the remnants of the phone scattered on the floor, as if it were a perfect metaphor for what was left of our family relationship. "Henry," I said in a voice that sounded strangely calm, even to myself, "you just crossed a line that you can't come back from." "Is that so?" he challenged, puffing out his chest like a street bully. "And what are you going to do about it, Mom? You don't have a phone anymore. You don't have anyone to help you. You're completely at our mercy." Marlene smiled with satisfaction, clearly enjoying the spectacle of seeing me finally subdued and humiliated, as she had planned for so long. What neither of them knew was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I kept staring at the phone fragments for several seconds, feeling something fundamental change inside me. It was no longer fear I felt, or sadness, or even rage. It was something much more dangerous, an absolute calm, the serenity of someone who has finally seen the true nature of the people in front of them. "You know what, Henry?" I said, bending down to pick up one of the largest pieces of the destroyed phone. "You're right. I don't have a phone anymore. I don't have anyone to help me. I am completely at your mercy." His smile widened, interpreting my words as surrender. "I'm glad you finally understand the situation." "Oh, I understand it perfectly," I continued, holding the broken plastic fragment as if it were a precious relic. "I understand that my own son just destroyed my only way of communicating with the outside world. I understand that he is threatening me in my own home. I understand that his wife is here, enjoying every second of my humiliation." Marlene came closer with that expression of triumph she had so long waited to show me. "Now maybe you can be reasonable, Ella. Making that new will is the only intelligent thing you can do in this situation." "You're right," I replied, dropping the piece of phone. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." They exchanged a look of absolute satisfaction, believing they had finally broken me. They had no idea that what had just broken wasn't my will, but the last chains that tied me to them out of love. "Perfect," Henry said, relaxing his shoulders. "I knew you would come to your senses. We'll go to the lawyer tomorrow morning and get all this settled." "Tomorrow," I repeated, nodding slowly. "Of course, tomorrow." "And in the meantime," Marlene added with that poisonous smile, "you should reflect on how you've been behaving lately. A little humility would do you good." "Humility," I murmured. "Yes, I definitely need more humility." Henry headed for the door, clearly satisfied with the outcome of his intimidation. "We're leaving now, but we'll come for you first thing in the morning, and you'd better be ready to cooperate." "Of course," I assured them, following them to the exit. "I'll be completely ready." Marlene stopped at the threshold and looked at me with the condescension she had perfected. "Ella, I know this has been hard for you, but one day you'll thank us for opening your eyes. Sometimes tough love is the only thing that works." "Tough love," I repeated her words. "Yes, I definitely need to learn more about tough love." They left without saying goodbye, leaving me alone in my house with the remains of my phone and something much more important: absolute clarity about who the people who had just walked out my door really were. I waited until I heard the sound of their car driving away before I moved. Then, with a calm that surprised me, I went to my bedroom and pulled out the cell phone I had secretly bought 3 months earlier from under the mattress. After realizing I needed a way to communicate that Henry didn't know about, I dialed Anne's number. "Anne, it's Ella. Could you come over? I need your help with something urgent." 20 minutes later, Anne was sitting in my living room, staring at the remnants of the phone with an expression of absolute horror. "Ella, this is very serious. Your own son threatened you and destroyed your phone. We have to call the police." "No," I said, serving her a cup of tea with perfectly steady hands. "Not yet." "What do you mean, not yet? This is domestic violence. It's intimidation. You can't let them treat you like this." "I won't let them," I assured her, "but I'm going to handle it my way." Anne studied me with those wise eyes of hers, trying to understand what I was thinking. "What do you have in mind?" "They think they've broken me," I explained, feeling a strange smile form on my lips. "They think tomorrow I'm going to go like an obedient sheep and make a new will where I leave them all my money." "And you're not going to?" "Oh, yes, I am," I said, and my smile widened. "But it won't be the will they expect." I explained my plan to Anne, who at first tried to dissuade me, insisting that it was too risky. But when I told her all the details of how they had treated me over the past few months, when she saw the remains of the phone and truly understood what had happened that afternoon, her expression completely changed. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she finally asked me. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. "For 30 years I've allowed myself to be treated badly out of fear of losing my son's love. But today I realized that love was lost a long time ago. What's left isn't love, it's habit, convenience, and greed." Anne nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to be my witness," I said. "I need you to see exactly how they behave toward me, so that when all this is over, you can testify about what really happened." That night, I couldn't sleep, but it wasn't because of fear or anxiety. It was because of the strange sense of freedom I was experiencing. For the first time in decades, I was going to take total control of my life. I was going to prove to Henry and Marlene that they had completely underestimated the woman they thought they had domesticated. At 6 a.m, I called the lawyer who had drawn up my original will. I explained that I needed to make some urgent changes and asked him to come to my house that same morning before Henry and Marlene arrived. "Are you sure about these changes, Ms. Ella?" the lawyer asked me after reviewing the new instructions I had given him. "They're quite drastic." "Completely sure," I confirmed, signing each page with a determination I hadn't felt in years. "And I want it to be absolutely clear that I am making these decisions in full use of my mental faculties, without any coercion." "Understood. The documents will be filed immediately." At 10 a.m, just as they had promised, I heard Henry's car pull up in front of my house. Anne was hiding in the kitchen, from where she could hear everything happening in the living room. My cell phone was recording, hidden among the couch cushions. I opened the door before they could knock, with a perfectly acted expression of resignation. "Good morning," I said in a submissive voice. "I was expecting you." Henry walked in with the arrogance of a conqueror he had shown the night before. "Perfect. I see a night of reflection did you good." "Yes," I murmured, keeping my gaze low. I understood everything perfectly. Marlene studied me suspiciously, as if she sensed that something wasn't quite right, but the performance of a defeated woman I was putting on seemed to convince her. "Did you call the lawyer?" Henry asked me. "He already came," I informed them. "The new will is already done." They exchanged a look of absolute triumph. They had won, or so they thought. "Excellent," Marlene said, sitting on my sofa as if she owned the house. "And what exactly does it say?" I showed them a copy of the document, watching their eyes light up as they read the first lines. What they didn't know was that what they held in their hands was a fake copy, prepared specifically for this moment. "Perfect," Henry murmured, reading about his complete inheritance. "I knew you would come to your senses." "Yes," I said, feeling the adrenaline begin to rush through my veins. I came to my senses completely. "Now that this is settled," Marlene said, putting the fake copy of the will in her purse like a trophy, "we need to talk about some other practical matters." "What kind of matters?" I asked, perfectly maintaining my act as a submissive, defeated woman. "Well," Henry chimed in, making himself comfortable in the armchair as if he were the new owner of the house. "Now that we know this property will eventually be ours, Marlene and I have been thinking that maybe it would be better if you moved to a place more appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age?" I repeated, feeling the rage begin to boil in my veins, but keeping my voice calm. "Yes, Mom, a place where you can receive the care you need. A senior living facility, maybe something with medical staff available 24/7. Marlene nodded with enthusiasm. We've been looking into some very good options, places where you can socialize with people your own age, where you won't have to worry about maintaining this big house." "I see," I murmured, clenching my fists behind my back. "And when would I have to make this transition?" "Well," Henry said, exchanging another knowing look with his wife, "we were actually thinking, the sooner the better. This house needs some major renovations if we're going to sell it for its real value." "Sell it?" I looked at them with feigned confusion. "But I thought you wanted it for yourselves." "Oh, no," Marlene replied with a laugh that made my teeth grind. "This house is too old, too small for our needs, but the lot is excellent, very well located. With the right renovations, or even better, by demolishing it and building something modern, we could get almost $400,000. There it was, the complete, ruthless truth. Not only did they want to kick me out of my own house, but they planned to erase every trace of the life I had built there, every memory of the years I had spent raising my son within these walls. $400,000, I repeated slowly. "That's a lot of money." "Exactly," Henry confirmed. "And with your savings, which according to the will amount to $50,000, we'd be talking about over $500,000. It's enough for Marlene and me to buy the house of our dreams in the best neighborhood in the city." "The house of your dreams," I murmured, feeling every word like a slap. "And where do I fit into these dreams?" "You're going to be perfectly cared for at the facility," Marlene assured me with the condescension she had so perfected. "You'll have everything you need: food, a roof over your head, medical attention. What more could a woman your age ask for?" What more could I ask for? Maybe respect, maybe gratitude, maybe for the son I sacrificed my whole life for, not to treat me like an old piece of furniture to be gotten rid of. "And when would all this be ready?" I asked them, still maintaining my act. "Actually," Henry said, looking at his wife as if asking for permission to continue, "we've already made some calls. There's a very good facility on the outskirts of town that has immediate availability. We could take you tomorrow morning to check it out." "Tomorrow?" The speed with which they had organized my exile took my breath away. "Isn't that a bit rushed?" "Mom," Henry said with the forced patience one uses with difficult children, "the longer we wait, the harder it will be for you to adapt. It's better to make the change quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid." Like ripping off a Band-Aid? That was the metaphor my son had chosen to describe the moment he would uproot me from my home, my memories, from everything that had been my world for 4 decades. "Besides," Marlene added, "we've already contacted some contractors to come and appraise the property. One of them can come next week, but we need the house to be available." "Available," I repeated to myself. "Exactly," she confirmed with a smile she didn't try to hide. I stayed silent for several minutes, pretending to process all the information they had given me. In reality, I was savoring every second of this conversation, recording every cruel word, every ruthless plan, every display of the greed and contempt they had been hiding behind their masks of filial concern. "You know what?" I finally said, getting up from the couch with deliberately slow movements. "I think you're right. I think it's time I accepted the reality of my situation." They both visibly relaxed, interpreting my words as the total surrender they had been looking for. "I'm glad to hear you say that," Henry said, also standing up. "I know it's difficult, but in the end, you'll be happier this way." "Happier," I nodded. "Yes, I'll definitely be happier." "So tomorrow we'll go see the facility?" Marlene asked, already taking out her phone to make some sort of arrangement. "Tomorrow," I confirmed. "But first, there's something I need to show you. Something important I found while I was organizing my things for the move." "What is it?" Henry asked with sudden interest. "It's in the basement," I explained, heading for the door that led to the stairs. "It's something that belonged to your grandfather, something I thought you might like to have as a family keepsake." Curiosity got the better of any caution they might have had. The two of them followed me into the basement, descending the wooden stairs that creaked under our feet. My basement was a place Henry had avoided for years. As a child, he had an irrational fear of closed, dark spaces, and as an adult he simply decided he had no reason to go down there. What he didn't know was that I had turned that space into my private sanctuary, the place where I kept all my most precious memories and some other items I had been collecting for years. "It's a bit dark," I told them, turning on the stair light but leaving the rest of the basement in shadows. "Be careful where you step." We reached the bottom of the stairs, and I flipped on the main light. The basement lit up, revealing what I had been preparing for months without their knowledge. "What is all this?" Marlene asked, looking around with a mixture of confusion and alarm. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings. But they weren't normal family keepsakes. They were evidence. There were photos of the bruises I had gotten after the times Henry had shoved me during our arguments. Copies of bank statements that showed all the loans he had never paid back. Recordings of conversations where he and Marlene talked about me disrespectfully, thinking I couldn't hear them. "This is my archive," I explained with a calmness that contrasted brutally with the look of growing panic on their faces. "Everything you've done, everything you've said, everything you've planned, it's all here." Henry walked up to one of the walls, reading some of the documents with a paleness that gave me immense satisfaction. "Mom, what is this? Why?" I finished his question. "Why did I document everything? Because I knew that eventually I was going to need proof of who you two really are." Marlene had found the transcripts of some of their cruelest phone conversations I had secretly recorded over the last few months. "This is illegal!" she shrieked, holding the papers with trembling hands. "You can't record private conversations." "Actually, I can," I informed her. "In my own home, I have the right to record any conversation, and considering I was documenting emotional and financial abuse, any court would consider it completely justified." The silence in the basement was deafening. Henry and Marlene moved between the walls, covered in evidence like zombies, reading transcripts of conversations where they had planned my future without consulting me, seeing photographs that documented every humiliation, every moment of contempt they had made me endure. "This right here," I said, pointing to a particular section of the wall, "is every time you borrowed money from me and never paid me back a single cent. In total, you owe me $47,000. Henry approached the documents, his face getting paler and paler. "Mom, those weren't loans. They were family assistance." "Family assistance?" I laughed with a bitterness that came from my soul. "Is that what you call theft now? Because right here I have recordings of you promising to pay me back every cent." Marlene had found the most damning photographs. Images of her going through my drawers without permission during their visits. Documents that proved she had been looking into the value of my property without my knowledge. Even screenshots of her text messages making fun of me with her friends. "How did you get all this?" she asked, her voice trembling with pure rage. "Your mistake, dear Marlene, was to completely underestimate the dramatic old lady you thought you had domesticated," I replied. "It turns out this old lady learned to use security cameras, recording apps, and many other modern tools during the months you thought I was losing my mind." In the center of the basement, there was a table with something neither of them had noticed until that moment, an open laptop with an active video call. "What is that?" Henry asked, walking toward the screen. "Oh, that," I said with a smile that came from my heart. "That's my life insurance. For the last 20 minutes, everything we've said up here and down here has been live-streamed to several very important people. The screen showed multiple video windows, a lawyer specializing in elder abuse, a social worker, Anne from my kitchen, and to my ultimate satisfaction, Mark, my neighbor who worked as an investigative journalist for the local newspaper. "Ella," the lawyer exclaimed from the screen, "are you okay? Do we need to call the police?" "I'm perfectly fine," I replied, without taking my eyes off the faces of absolute horror on Henry and Marlene. "In fact, I've never felt better." "Turn that off!" Marlene screamed, lunging for the computer, but I was faster and closed it before she could reach it. "Too late," I informed her. "Everything is already recorded and saved in multiple locations. Your plans to put me in a facility, your comments about demolishing my house, your confession about the $400,000 you expect to make from my property, all of it." Henry fell into an old chair I had in the basement, his head in his hands. "Mom, what have you done?" "What I should have done months ago," I replied. "Protected myself from you two." "You can't use any of this," Marlene screamed, waving the papers she had been reading. "It's private conversations. It's an invasion of privacy." "Honey," I said with infinite patience, "documenting abuse isn't an invasion of privacy. It's survival." I walked toward another section of the wall where something was hung that filled them with even greater terror: copies of recent legal documents. "These right here are particularly interesting," I continued. "They're the lawsuits I'm going to file next week. One for elder financial abuse, another for intimidation and threats, and this last one for property damage for the phone you destroyed yesterday." "Are you crazy?" Henry yelled, standing up abruptly. "I'm your son. You can't sue your own son." "My son?" I looked at him with a coldness that made him recoil. "My son died months ago, Henry. The person standing in front of me is a stranger who threatens me, who destroys my things, who plans to steal my inheritance and put me in a home against my will." Tears began to roll down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, of justice, of a satisfaction I had been waiting to feel for far too long. "But that's not all," I continued, walking toward the most important document of all. "This one right here is my favorite." I showed them a copy of the real will, the one I had signed that morning with the lawyer. "Remember the will I showed you upstairs? It was fake. This is the real one." Henry snatched the document from my hands, reading it with a desperation that gave me more pleasure than I had felt in years. "This can't be," he mumbled, reading line by line. "You can't have done this." "What does it say?" Marlene asked, trying to read over her husband's shoulder. "It says," I informed her with a radiant smile, "that all my property and my savings will go to a foundation for single mothers who are fighting to get an education for their children. It says that not a single cent will go to people who treat the elderly like garbage." Marlene went completely pale. "You can't do that. We're your family." "My family." I laughed until my ribs hurt. "My family doesn't threaten me. My family doesn't plan to put me in a facility so they can sell my house. My family doesn't destroy my things when they don't get what they want." "Mom, please," Henry pleaded, and for the first time in months, I saw something that resembled the son I had raised. "I knew we had been difficult with you, but I didn't know you felt this way." "You didn't know?" I snatched the will from his hands. "You didn't know when you hung up on me while I had a fever? You didn't know when you allowed your wife to insult me in my own house? You didn't know when you threatened to leave me completely alone if I didn't do what you wanted?" I was just frustrated," he stammered. "I didn't mean those things." "But you said them, and you meant them. And for months, you treated me as if I were a nuisance you had to tolerate until you could finally get rid of me." Marlene had started to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of pure rage and frustration at seeing her perfect plan crumble before her eyes. "This isn't over," she shrieked. "We're going to contest that will. We're going to prove you aren't of sound mind." "Go ahead," I told her, moving closer until we were face to face. "Try to prove I'm not of sound mind. Try to explain to a judge why a woman who meticulously documented months of abuse and neglect doesn't have the right to decide what to do with her own money." The silence that followed was absolute. They both finally understood that they had lost, that their greed and cruelty had been their undoing. "Besides," I added, heading toward the stairs, "you forgot that all of this is going to be published in the newspaper next week. Mark already has all the material he needs to write a very interesting article about elder abuse in middle-class families. Your names, your photographs, your own words describing your plans for me." "You can't do that," Henry yelled, following me toward the stairs. "That will ruin my career." "You should have thought about that before you threatened your mother," I replied, without turning to look at him. We reached the main floor of the house, where Anne was waiting for us with a look of absolute satisfaction on her face. "How did it go?" she asked, even though the devastated expressions of Henry and Marlene had already given her the answer. "Perfectly," I replied. I think our guests are ready to leave now." Henry and Marlene stood in my living room like statues, processing the magnitude of what had just happened to them. All their arrogance had vanished, replaced by a desperation that I might have pitied if I hadn't been savoring every second of their destruction. "Mom," Henry said to me in a broken voice I hadn't heard since he was a child, "there has to be a way to fix this. We're family. We can find a solution." "A solution?" I looked at him with a calm that contrasted brutally with his panic. "The only solution was for you to treat me like a human being. You had that opportunity for months, and you wasted it every single day." Marlene had started pacing in circles, mumbling to herself about lawyers and legal appeals, completely unable to accept that they had been defeated by the dramatic old lady they had so underestimated. "Ella," she finally said, trying to regain some of her former composure, "I know we've had our differences, but this is too extreme. You're destroying your own family." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied. "You destroyed this family the day you decided that my love was a burden and my money was your right. I'm just documenting the destruction you've already caused." Anne came over to me and placed a protective hand on my shoulder. "Ella, I think it's time for them to go. The police are on their way to take a formal report about the intimidation and the broken phone." "The police?" Henry went even paler. "Mom, please, don't do this. My job, my reputation, everything is going to be ruined." "Your reputation?" I repeated his words with genuine incredulity. "Until the very end, all you care about is your reputation. Not the pain you caused me, not the years I lost loving you unconditionally. Just your precious reputation." "It's not just that!" he yelled. And for a moment, I saw a flicker of the violent temper he had shown the day before. "It's my whole life, my career, everything I've worked for." "Everything you've worked for?" I murmured, walking to the window where I could see the flashing lights of a police cruiser approaching down the street. "Are you referring to the career I paid for with my savings? The job you got thanks to the education I financed by working double shifts?" The sound of the siren grew louder, and both Henry and Marlene instinctively headed for the door, like frightened animals, looking for an escape. "Don't go yet," I said to them with a smile that must have been terrifying. "I want you to stay and meet the officers. I want you to personally explain why you thought threatening a 66-year-old woman was a good idea." The police knocked on the door at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 2 young officers listened to my story with a seriousness that filled me with satisfaction. Anne corroborated everything she had witnessed, and the audio recordings I had made were accepted as preliminary evidence. "Ms. Elliott," one of the officers said to me after taking all the information, "do you want to press formal charges against your son and his daughter-in-law?" I looked at Henry, who was sitting on my sofa with his head in his hands, completely defeated. For a second, just 1 second, I felt a flicker of the maternal love that had defined my life for so many years. Then I remembered his words from the day before. "No one asked you to sacrifice your life for me." I remembered the cruel smile with which he had destroyed my phone. I remembered the plans they had made to put me in a facility without my consent. "Yes," I replied to the officer in a firm voice. "I want to press formal charges." The legal process that followed was exactly as devastating as I had expected. The local newspapers covered the story in great detail, especially after Mark published his investigative article titled "The Price of Indifference: When Children Become Predators." The company where Henry worked fired him after the scandal reached his supervisors. Marlene lost her position at the clinic when the administrators decided that a person involved in elder abuse was not appropriate for a medical environment. But what gave me the most satisfaction was not their professional ruin, but something much simpler and more personal. One afternoon, 3 months after all the legal drama, Henry showed up at my door. He was alone, without Marlene, with a defeated expression that would have broken my heart under other circumstances. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" I looked at him for a long moment, studying his haggard face, his deep, dark circles, the way he had aged years in just a few weeks. "No," I replied simply. "Please," he pleaded, and tears began to roll down his cheeks. "I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, my marriage. Marlene left me last week. I have nothing." "Now you know how that feels," I said with an absolute calm. "Now you know what it's like to lose everything because of someone who's supposed to love you." "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about everything. I know I was terrible to you. I know you didn't deserve anything we did, but I'm your son. There has to be some way to fix this." For a moment, I felt the familiar temptation to comfort him, to open my arms and forgive everything as I had done so many times before. But then I remembered something I had learned during these months of freedom. Forgiveness without consequences isn't love. It's cowardice. "Henry," I said, keeping the door ajar, "for 30 years I forgave you for every cruelty, every moment of contempt, every time you treated me as if I were less important than anything else in your life. I forgave you because I thought that's what loving mothers do." "Exactly!" he exclaimed, trying to move closer. "You're my mother. You love me." "I loved you," I corrected him. "I loved the sweet boy who used to hug me when he had nightmares. I loved the ambitious young man who promised me he would one day give me back everything I sacrificed for him. But that boy, that young man, they died a long time ago. The person standing in front of me is a stranger who chose greed over love, who chose cruelty over gratitude." "Can I change?" he yelled desperately. "Can I go back to being the son you want?" "I don't want you to change for me," I said, starting to close the door. "If you ever change, let it be for yourself, because you realize that the person you became is despicable. But it's no longer my responsibility to fix you." "Mom, please!" He put his foot in the door, preventing me from closing it completely. "You can't abandon me like this. I'm your only son." I didn't reply with a firmness that surprised even myself. "You abandoned me. I'm just officially acknowledging something that happened months ago." I gently but firmly pushed his foot away and closed the door. I heard his sobs on the other side, his pleas, his promises of change that came far too late. I stayed on the other side of the door for several minutes, listening to the man who had once been my reason for living completely fall apart on my porch. Part of me wanted to open it, to comfort him, to go back to being the mother who forgave everything. But a stronger part, the part of me that had been reborn in that basement full of evidence, the part that had learned to value herself, stood firm. Finally, I heard his footsteps walking away, the sound of a car starting, and then silence. I went to the kitchen where Anne was waiting for me with a cup of hot tea and a proud smile. "How do you feel?" she asked me. "Free," I replied, taking the cup with hands that no longer trembled. For the first time in 30 years, I feel completely free. That night, as I got ready for bed in my house, which no one was going to take from me anymore, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had lost my only son, but I had gained something infinitely more valuable: my dignity. At 66, I had learned that self-love isn't selfishness, it's survival. I had learned that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's a necessity. I had learned that sometimes the only way to save what is left of your soul is to cut the ties that are destroying you. I gave everything for a son who saw me as a walking ATM, but now, finally, I was going to give everything for the only person who truly deserved it, myself. And for the first time in decades, that perspective didn't scare me, it excited me.